Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands as she finished calibrating the radio equipment. The military base in Afghanistan buzzed with activity around her, but she remained focused on her work. Most soldiers barely noticed the quiet woman who kept their communication systems running perfectly. At 28, Sarah had been working as a civilian contractor for 3 years. She fixed radios, computers, and satellite equipment for the Special Operations Unit stationed at Forward Operating Base Titan. The soldiers respected her technical skills, but they saw her as just another support staff member who stayed safe inside the wire while they went on dangerous missions. What they didn't know was that Sarah had a different life before becoming a technician. She had served 8 years in the Marine Corps as a sniper and reconnaissance specialist. Her military record was classified at the highest levels. She had completed missions in 17 different countries, eliminated high-value targets, and earned medals that she could never publicly display. Sarah had chosen to leave active duty after losing her entire squad in an ambush in Syria. The guilt and trauma made her want a quieter life. She thought working as a technician would help her find peace. She deliberately kept her military background secret, telling people she had been a computer programmer before taking the contractor job. The base commander, Colonel Richardson, was one of only 2 people who knew her real history. He had personally recruited her for this position, knowing that having someone with her skills disguised as support staff could prove valuable. The other person who knew was Dr. James Chen, the base psychologist who had cleared her for duty after extensive counseling sessions. Every morning, Sarah arrived at the communications bunker at 6 o'clock sharp. She would check all the equipment, run diagnostics, and prepare the systems for the day's operations. The soldiers would come in for radio checks, equipment repairs, and technical support. They treated her politely but kept their distance, seeing her as an outsider who couldn't understand their world. Lieutenant Marcus Torres, the unit's youngest officer, was different. He often stayed to chat while Sarah worked on his equipment. He asked about her background and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts about military operations. Sarah found herself enjoying these conversations, but she always kept her answers vague and deflected personal questions. The base had been relatively quiet for the past 6 months. The Taliban activity in the region had decreased significantly, and most patrols returned without incident. This peaceful period made everyone more relaxed, but Sarah's instincts told her that something was building. She noticed increased chatter on intercepted radio frequencies and unusual movement patterns in the surrounding villages. Sarah's technical work gave her access to intelligence reports and surveillance data that most people on the base never saw. She spent her evenings analyzing patterns and tracking suspicious activities. Her training had taught her to recognize the signs of an impending attack, and every indicator was pointing toward trouble. She tried to share her concerns with the intelligence officer, Captain Williams, but he dismissed her observations. In his mind, she was just a technician who was reading too much into routine data. He reminded her that her job was to fix equipment, not analyze intelligence. This frustrated Sarah, but she couldn't reveal why she had the expertise to make such assessments. 3 weeks before the ambush, Sarah noticed that the local interpreters were acting strangely. 2 of them had stopped showing up for work without explanation. The remaining interpreters seemed nervous and avoided eye contact with the American soldiers. These behavioral changes were classic indicators that local assets had been compromised or intimidated. Sarah began taking extra precautions with her personal security. She started carrying a concealed pistol, which was against regulations for civilian contractors. She also began studying the base's defensive positions and identifying potential escape routes. Her Marine training was slowly reasserting itself as her survival instincts awakened. The night before the attack, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked around the base perimeter, checking the defensive positions and noting weaknesses in their security setup. The guard posts were undermanned and there were several blind spots in their surveillance coverage. She considered approaching Colonel Richardson with her concerns, but decided to wait until morning. At 4 a.m., Sarah was in her quarters when she heard the first explosion. The attack had begun earlier than she expected, and it was more coordinated than anything the base had faced before. As alarms blared and soldiers scrambled to their positions, Sarah realized that her quiet life as a technician was about to end forever. The mortar rounds exploded across the base with devastating precision, Sarah rolled out of her bunk as shrapnel tore through the thin walls of her quarters. The attackers had clearly studied the base layout for months. They knew exactly where to hit for maximum damage. Sarah grabbed her gear bag and weapon, moving with the fluid efficiency of her Marine training. Outside, chaos erupted as soldiers ran toward their defensive positions. The communication towers were among the first targets destroyed, cutting off the base's ability to call for reinforcements or air support. In the darkness, muzzle flashes lit up the perimeter as enemy fighters poured through breaches in the outer fence. Sarah counted at least 60 attackers, far more than the base's 42 defenders could handle in a conventional fight. The enemy had night vision equipment and moved with military precision, suggesting they were not ordinary Taliban fighters. Colonel Richardson's voice boomed over the base's emergency speaker system, ordering all personnel to fall back to the central bunker complex. Sarah knew this was a tactical mistake. The bunkers would become a death trap if the enemy controlled the surrounding areas. Her military experience told her that a fighting retreat would be more effective. As Sarah moved toward the communication bunker to secure sensitive equipment, she saw Lieutenant Torres pinned down behind a concrete barrier. 3 enemy fighters were advancing on his position and his rifle had jammed. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped to a prone position and engaged the attackers with her concealed pistol. Her shots were precise and lethal. Each bullet found its target despite the difficult shooting conditions. Torres looked at her with shock and confusion as she smoothly reloaded and continued providing cover fire. The quiet technician he knew had suddenly transformed into a deadly warrior. "Who are you?" Torres shouted over the gunfire as they moved together toward better cover. Sarah didn't answer. She was focused on assessing the tactical situation and identifying the enemy's command structure. Her trained eye picked out the team leaders and communications personnel among the attackers. These would be her priority targets if she decided to engage fully. The base's main generator exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging most of the facility into darkness. The attackers had studied every detail of the base's infrastructure. They knew exactly which systems to target to create maximum confusion and disable the defenders' advantages. Captain Williams was coordinating the defense from the command bunker, but his conventional tactics were failing against the sophisticated attack. The enemy was using squad-level fire and movement techniques that suggested professional military training. Sarah realized these weren't local insurgents but foreign fighters or mercenaries. Dr. Chen found Sarah and Torres near the medical facility and urged them to fall back to the bunkers with the other non-combat personnel. Sarah's instincts screamed against this plan. Bunching up all the personnel in one location would make them easy targets for the enemy's mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. The sound of helicopters approached from the east, but Sarah quickly realized they weren't American aircraft. The attackers had air support, which explained their confidence in assaulting a fortified position. 2 attack helicopters began strafing the base's defensive positions, forcing the soldiers to abandon their prepared fighting positions. Sarah watched as the carefully planned attack unfolded with military precision. The enemy had cut communications, disabled the power grid, suppressed the defenders with indirect fire, and was now systematically clearing the base building by building. It was a textbook assault that would overwhelm the outnumbered garrison within minutes. As more soldiers fell back toward the bunkers, Sarah made a critical decision. She couldn't save everyone by hiding in a concrete box and hoping for rescue. The only way to turn the tide was to become the weapon she had been trained to be. She needed to abandon her cover as a technician and embrace her lethal skills. Sarah quietly separated from the retreating group and moved toward the base's ammunition storage facility. If she could reach the weapons cache, she could arm herself properly and begin hunting the enemy team leaders. Her Marine training had taught her that eliminating key personnel could collapse an enemy's entire command structure. The storage facility was located in the most heavily attacked section of the base. Getting there would require her to move through areas controlled by enemy fighters. Sarah checked her equipment one final time and began her approach. The quiet technician was gone, replaced by a ghost from her classified past. As she moved through the shadows, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with combat. Her breathing slowed, her vision sharpened, and every sound became crystal clear. The guilt and trauma that had driven her from military service faded away, replaced by the focused determination of a professional warrior returning to battle. Sarah moved through the darkness like a predator returning to hunt. Every step was calculated, every shadow utilized for concealment. The chaos of battle provided perfect cover as she made her way toward the weapons storage facility. Enemy fighters rushed past her position, focused on their assault objectives and unaware of the deadly threat moving among them. The storage building had taken several direct hits, but the reinforced structure remained intact. Sarah approached from the blind spot she had identified during her security walks. 2 enemy fighters guarded the entrance, but they were watching for threats from the wrong direction. Sarah's knife found the first guard's throat before he could make a sound. The second guard turned at the slight noise, but Sarah's hand clamped over his mouth as her blade ended his life instantly. She dragged both bodies into the shadows and took their weapons and ammunition. Inside the storage facility, Sarah equipped herself with tools she hadn't used in 3 years. She selected a suppressed assault rifle, night vision goggles, and enough ammunition to sustain a prolonged engagement. More importantly, she found the specialized equipment that would allow her to operate as a lone hunter, rather than a conventional soldier. Sarah also grabbed several smoke grenades and explosive charges. Her plan was taking shape as she inventoried the available resources. She wouldn't try to defend fixed positions like the other soldiers. Instead, she would become a mobile threat that could strike anywhere and disappear before the enemy could respond. The base's layout worked in her favor now that she had abandoned her defensive mindset. She knew every building, every pathway, and every hiding spot. The attackers might have studied the base for months, but Sarah had lived here for 3 years. This was her terrain now. Her first target was the enemy command post, which she identified by observing radio communications and movement patterns. The assault leader had positioned himself in the base's motor pool, using the elevated position to coordinate his teams. Taking him out would disrupt their coordination and buy time for the defending soldiers. Sarah approached the motor pool using the drainage ditches that ran beneath the facility. The concrete tunnels were cramped and filled with standing water, but they provided concealed movement routes that the attackers hadn't considered. She emerged directly beneath the enemy commander's position. The assault leader was shouting orders into his radio when Sarah's suppressed rifle ended his command permanently. His radio operator reached for his weapon, but Sarah's second shot dropped him before he could raise the alarm. She quickly gathered their communications equipment and disappeared back into the tunnel system. Without their commander's coordination, the enemy teams began operating independently. Their precisely timed assault started to lose momentum, as units waited for orders that would never come. Sarah monitored their radio traffic through the captured equipment, gaining valuable intelligence about their positions and intentions. Her next targets were the machine gun teams that had pinned down the base's defenders. Sarah identified 3 heavy weapons positions that were preventing the soldiers from mounting an effective counterattack. Eliminating these would allow the defenders to regain the initiative. The first machine gun team had set up in the base's water treatment plant. Sarah approached from above, using the facility's catwalk system to position herself directly over their fighting position. Her grenades landed with perfect precision, silencing the weapon and eliminating its crew before they could react. The second team was harder to reach, positioned in an open area with excellent fields of fire. Sarah used smoke grenades to obscure their vision, then closed the distance while they were blinded. Her assault rifle chattered briefly in the artificial fog, and another threat was eliminated. The third machine gun team had learned from the fate of their companions. They had repositioned to a more defensible location and were scanning for the phantom that was hunting them. Sarah spent 20 minutes studying their position before finding her approach route. She used the base's underground utility tunnels to emerge behind their position. The machine gunners were focused on threats to their front and flanks, never suspecting that danger would come from below. Sarah's attack was swift and silent, eliminating the crew before they could warn their remaining teammates. Colonel Richardson's voice came over the enemy radio net, speaking in accented English. Sarah realized with shock that some of the attackers were using captured American communication equipment. The enemy commander was trying to deceive the remaining defenders by giving false orders. Sarah switched to the emergency frequency that only she and the colonel knew about. Her brief transmission warned him about the deception and provided intelligence about remaining enemy positions. Richardson's response was filled with amazement and confusion, but he acknowledged her information. The tide of battle was beginning to shift as Sarah's actions took effect. The defending soldiers, no longer pinned down by machine gun fire, began to mount coordinated counterattacks. The enemy's assault was losing momentum, But Sarah knew the most dangerous phase was still ahead. The remaining attackers would realize they were being hunted by a skilled opponent. They would adapt their tactics and begin hunting the hunter. Sarah had faced this situation before in other conflicts, and she knew that the next phase of the battle would test every skill she had learned during her classified military career. The enemy's second-in-command was no fool. After losing contact with multiple teams, he quickly realized that a skilled operator was hunting his forces. Sarah intercepted his radio transmissions as he reorganized his remaining fighters into hunter-killer teams specifically tasked with finding and eliminating the phantom that was destroying his carefully planned assault. Sarah knew she had gained the enemy's attention, which meant her tactics had to evolve. She could no longer rely on surprise attacks against isolated targets. The remaining 25 enemy fighters would be actively searching for her, and they had the advantage of numbers and coordinated communication. From her position in the maintenance tunnels beneath the base, Sarah studied the new threat through her night vision scope. The enemy had deployed 3 4-man teams in a search pattern designed to flush her from hiding. They moved with professional discipline, checking corners and maintaining communication. These weren't ordinary insurgents but trained soldiers with counterinsurgency experience. The 4th team was setting up a command post in the base's communications center, trying to restore their damaged radio network. Sarah realized this was both a threat and an opportunity. If she could eliminate their communications hub, the search teams would lose coordination. But attacking a fortified position would expose her to the other teams converging on her location. Sarah decided to use the enemy's own tactics against them. Instead of attacking directly, she would make them think she was planning an assault on the communications center while actually targeting a different objective. She began moving toward the center, deliberately leaving traces of her passage for the search teams to find. The first hunter team took the bait, following her trail toward the communications building. Sarah led them through a maze of corridors and maintenance areas, always staying just ahead of their pursuit. She wanted them committed to the chase before springing her real plan. When the first team was fully engaged in following her trail, Sarah doubled back through a route they had already cleared. She emerged behind the second search team, which was moving to support their companions. Her suppressed rifle eliminated 2 team members before they realized the danger was behind them. The surviving members of the second team tried to take cover, but Sarah had positioned herself with multiple escape routes. She eliminated 1 more attacker before disappearing back into the tunnel system. The enemy's careful search pattern was beginning to collapse as teams abandoned their assigned areas to pursue contact. Sarah's radio crackled with panicked enemy transmissions as the remaining search teams tried to reorganize. Their commander was shouting orders, but his forces were scattered and confused. The hunter had become the hunted, but Sarah was proving to be exceptionally elusive prey. The third search team made a critical mistake by splitting up to cover more ground. Sarah tracked the smaller element to the base's vehicle maintenance bay, where 2 fighters were searching for her escape routes. She used a flashbang grenade to disorient them before moving in with her knife. Close combat was always the most dangerous phase of these encounters, but Sarah's Marine training had prepared her for knife fighting. Her opponents were skilled, but they were also confused and partially blinded by the grenade. The fight was brief and brutal, ending with both enemy fighters dead. The remaining search team finally located Sarah's general position and began coordinating with the command post to trap her. They had learned from their mistakes and were now moving with proper mutual support. Sarah found herself genuinely challenged for the first time since the battle began. Sarah realized she needed to change tactics completely. The enemy had adapted to her guerrilla approach and was forcing her into a conventional firefight where their numbers would prevail. She needed to create a game-changing event that would restore her advantage. The base's fuel depot was located near her current position, and Sarah remembered that it contained thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. A properly placed explosive charge would create a massive fireball that would illuminate the entire base and eliminate any enemies in the immediate area. But using the fuel depot was extremely risky. The explosion would also endanger the remaining American defenders, and the resulting fire would eliminate Sarah's concealment advantages. She would be exposed on a brightly lit battlefield with limited escape routes. Sarah made her decision based on a quick tactical calculation. The enemy command post was positioned close enough to the fuel depot that the explosion would eliminate their leadership and communications. The remaining scattered fighters would lose coordination and become easier targets for the base's defenders. She placed her explosive charges with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. The timer would give her 30 seconds to reach minimum safe distance, barely enough time given her current position. Sarah activated the charges and began her sprint toward cover. The explosion exceeded even her expectations. The fuel depot erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the night sky for miles. The shockwave shattered windows throughout the base and knocked Sarah to the ground despite her distance from the blast. When she looked back, the entire communications center was engulfed in flames. The explosion marked a turning point in the battle. The enemy's coordinated assault collapsed into chaos as their remaining fighters found themselves leaderless and blinded by the intense light. But Sarah's advantages were also gone. She was now exposed on an open battlefield with nowhere to hide. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and Sarah would have to rely on pure fighting skill rather than stealth and surprise. The quiet technician had evolved into something far more dangerous, but the ultimate test of her abilities was still ahead. The massive explosion had fundamentally changed the battlefield. Where once Sarah had operated from shadows and concealment, now everything was illuminated by the raging fires from the fuel depot. The remaining 14 enemy fighters could see her clearly, but she could also see them. The stealthy phase of the battle was over, replaced by a deadly game of skill and positioning. Sarah counted her remaining ammunition and assessed her tactical situation. She had enough rounds for a sustained firefight, but not enough to waste on suppressive fire. Every shot would need to count if she hoped to survive against superior numbers. The base's remaining defenders were slowly advancing from their bunker positions, but they were too far away to provide immediate support. The enemy fighters had regrouped into 2 teams of 7, approaching from different directions to prevent Sarah from escaping. They moved with the confidence of professionals who believed they had cornered their prey. Their mistake was underestimating how dangerous a cornered Marine could become. Sarah positioned herself in the base's workshop building, which provided multiple firing positions and several escape routes. The concrete structure would stop most small arms fire, and the complex interior layout would force the attackers to clear it room by room. This would neutralize their numerical advantage by limiting how many could engage her simultaneously. The first team approached from the east, using fire and movement tactics to advance under covering fire. Sarah let them get close before engaging, wanting to ensure maximum effectiveness from her limited ammunition. When they reached the workshop's entrance, she opened fire from an unexpected angle. Her first burst dropped 2 attackers before they could take cover. The surviving team members scattered and began returning fire, but Sarah had already moved to a different position. The workshop's layout allowed her to appear and disappear like a ghost, striking from unexpected directions. The second team tried to flank the building while their companions kept Sarah pinned down. But Sarah had anticipated this move and positioned claymore mines at the likely approach routes. The devastating explosions eliminated 3 more attackers and wounded 2 others severely enough to remove them from the fight. Sarah's radio crackled with transmissions from Lieutenant Torres, who was leading a squad of defenders toward her position. But the remaining enemy fighters had taken positions between Sarah and the approaching reinforcements. Torres and his men would have to fight through a gauntlet of enemy fire to reach her. The tactical situation was becoming desperate for both sides. The enemy had lost most of their force but still outnumbered Sarah and controlled key terrain. Sarah had eliminated the majority of the attackers, but was running low on ammunition and had limited options for withdrawal. Sarah made a bold decision that would have shocked her commanding officers during her Marine service. Instead of waiting for rescue, she would go on the offensive and eliminate the remaining threats before reinforcements arrived. Her assault rifle had enough ammunition for one final engagement. She emerged from the workshop like an avenging spirit, using smoke grenades to obscure the enemy's vision while advancing on their positions. The remaining fighters had expected her to remain defensive, and her sudden assault caught them completely off guard. Sarah's movement was fluid and precise, each step calculated to maintain maximum effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. She had entered what Marines called the zone, a state of hyper-awareness where time seemed to slow and every detail became crystal clear. Her rifle spoke with mechanical precision as she engaged target after target. The enemy fighters tried to respond, But Sarah was always one step ahead, anticipating their movements and positioning herself for the next engagement. Her training and natural ability combined into something that approached tactical perfection. The surviving enemy commander realized that his remaining fighters faced an opponent far beyond their ability to defeat. He began calling for a general withdrawal, but Sarah had cut off their primary escape routes. The hunters had become trapped by their intended prey. As the last enemy fighter fell to Sarah's precise marksmanship, an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. The only sounds were the crackling of fires and the distant approach of Torres's rescue team. Sarah stood alone among the bodies of 50 enemy fighters, her weapon smoking in the firelight. Lieutenant Torres and his squad arrived to find Sarah calmly reloading her rifle and checking the enemy dead for intelligence materials. The young officer stared at the scene with amazement and growing understanding. The quiet technician he had known was clearly someone completely different. "Jesus Christ, Martinez," Torres whispered as he surveyed the battlefield. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah looked at him with eyes that held 3 years of carefully buried memories. The explosion and firefight had awakened something in her that civilian life had tried to suppress. She was no longer the trauma-scarred veteran hiding behind a technician's cover story. She was the weapon that the Marine Corps had spent years creating. Colonel Richardson's voice came over Torres's radio, requesting an immediate situation report. The young lieutenant looked at Sarah, understanding that whatever he said next would change everything for the woman who had just saved the entire base. Sarah made the decision for him. She took the radio and spoke directly to the colonel, using her real military identification code for the first time in 3 years. The quiet technician was officially dead, replaced by the ghost warrior who had always been hiding beneath the surface. Dawn broke over forward operating base Titan with an orange glow that reflected off the smoke and debris scattered across the compound. Sarah sat on a concrete barrier, methodically cleaning her rifle while medics tended to the wounded, and Graves registration teams processed the enemy dead. The transformation from technician to warrior was complete, but the psychological aftermath was just beginning. Colonel Richardson approached her position with a mixture of relief and concern. He had known Sarah's classified history, but even he hadn't expected her to single-handedly eliminate an entire assault force. The official casualty report showed 53 enemy fighters killed, with Sarah responsible for 47 of those deaths. It was a level of combat effectiveness that would raise questions at the highest levels of command. "We need to talk," Richardson said quietly, sitting down beside her. "The Pentagon is already asking questions about what happened here. A technical contractor doesn't develop those kinds of combat skills overnight." Sarah continued cleaning her weapon, not meeting his eyes. "My cover was blown the moment I picked up this rifle. 3 years of trying to be someone else just went up in smoke with that fuel depot." The base's soldiers were looking at her differently now. Word had spread quickly about the quiet technician who had turned into a one-person army. Some watched her with awe, others with caution as if they weren't sure whether she was an asset or a threat. The comfortable anonymity she had enjoyed was gone forever. Dr. Chen arrived with his medical kit, wanting to check Sarah for injuries and psychological trauma. He had been working with her for 3 years to help her process the guilt from her previous military service. Now he was watching her deal with the aftermath of violence on an even greater scale. "How are you feeling about what happened?" Chen asked as he examined a minor shrapnel wound on her arm. Sarah finally looked up from her rifle. "I feel like myself again for the first time in 3 years. That should probably worry you more than anything else." Lieutenant Torres couldn't stay away from her position. He kept finding excuses to walk past, staring at the woman he thought he had known. Their casual conversations about military tactics now made perfect sense. She hadn't been guessing about combat operations. She had been drawing from extensive personal experience. "You let me lecture you about small unit tactics," Torres said, when he finally worked up the courage to approach her directly. "You sat there and listened to me explain things you probably knew better than any instructor at West Point." Sarah managed a tired smile. "Your tactics were actually pretty good, Lieutenant. A little textbook, but solid fundamentals. You would have made good decisions if you'd had more time to implement them." The base's communication systems were slowly coming back online, and Sarah knew that meant increased scrutiny from higher command levels. Her actions had saved the base, but they had also exposed a classified operator who was supposed to be retired. The Marine Corps would want explanations, and the CIA would want to know why one of their former assets had blown her cover. Captain Williams, the intelligence officer who had dismissed her concerns weeks earlier, approached with obvious embarrassment. The attack had unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted, and his failure to listen to her warnings had nearly cost everyone their lives. "I owe you an apology," Williams said. "Your intelligence analysis was spot on. I should have listened when you tried to warn us." Sarah shrugged. "You saw a technician trying to do your job. I would have reacted the same way if someone had walked into my shop and started telling me how to fix radios. The sound of helicopters announced the arrival of the investigation team that Richardson had been dreading. Sarah watched the aircraft approach and knew that her quiet life was officially over. The people stepping off those helicopters would want detailed explanations about everything that had happened. Among the investigators was a woman in civilian clothes who Sarah recognized immediately. Agent Patricia Hayes from the CIA's Special Activities Division had been her handler during several classified missions. Her presence meant that Sarah's involvement in the base's defense had attracted attention from the intelligence community. Hayes approached with the confident stride of someone used to asking difficult questions and getting honest answers. She looked at the battlefield, then at Sarah, calculating the implications of what had transpired. "Hello, Sarah," Hayes said. "We need to discuss your retirement status." Sarah stood up and shouldered her rifle. "I figured you'd show up eventually. 3 years was longer than I expected to stay hidden." Richardson watched the exchange with growing understanding. Sarah's history was even more classified than he had realized. The woman he had recruited as a technician was apparently a former CIA operative with skills that went far beyond military training. The investigation would take days to complete, but Sarah knew the outcome was already decided. Her cover was blown, her secret was out, and her attempt at a normal life was over. The question now was whether she would return to active service or find a different way to use the skills that had just saved 42 lives. As the investigators began their work, Sarah walked toward the communications bunker, where she had spent 3 peaceful years fixing radios and trying to forget who she really was. That quiet technician was gone forever, but perhaps it was time to stop running from the warrior she had always been. The battle was over, but Sarah's real war was just beginning. She would have to decide whether to embrace her lethal skills or continue fighting against her own nature. The choice would define the rest of her life. 6 months after the attack on Forward Operating Base Titan, Sarah Martinez stood in a conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The investigation had concluded with her receiving both official commendations and unofficial job offers. The quiet technician who had eliminated 50 enemy fighters in a single night was in high demand. Throughout the intelligence community, Agent Hayes sat across from her, with a thick folder containing Sarah's new assignment options. The CIA wanted her back in the Special Activities Division. The Marine Corps offered her a commission and command of an elite reconnaissance unit. Even the FBI's hostage rescue team had submitted a recruitment proposal. Everyone wanted the woman who had proved that legends could still walk among ordinary people. "You have your pick of assignments," Hayes explained. "After what happened in Afghanistan, every special operations unit in the government wants you on their roster. The question is what you want to do." Sarah looked out the window at the Virginia countryside, thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been a broken veteran trying to escape her past. The attack on the base had forced her to confront who she really was, but it had also given her something she hadn't expected: peace with her own nature. Dr. Chen had continued working with her throughout the investigation and debriefing process. Their sessions had helped her understand that running from her skills and training hadn't healed her trauma. Instead, accepting her abilities and using them to protect others had given her a sense of purpose that civilian life never could. Lieutenant Torres had been promoted to captain and given command of his own unit. He had requested Sarah as his senior enlisted advisor, believing that her combat experience and tactical knowledge could save countless lives in future operations. His offer appealed to Sarah because it would involve training and mentoring rather than direct combat missions. Colonel Richardson had also received a promotion, becoming the commanding officer of a new special operations training facility. He wanted Sarah to develop curricula for unconventional warfare and survival training. Her unique combination of technical skills and combat experience made her ideal for preparing the next generation of special operators. But the most intriguing offer came from an unexpected source. The State Department wanted her to join a new diplomatic security unit that would protect American personnel in the world's most dangerous locations. The work would combine her protective instincts with opportunities to use her technical expertise in legitimate ways. Sarah had spent weeks considering her options, but her decision was ultimately influenced by a conversation with a survivor from her old Marine unit. Sergeant Rodriguez, one of only 3 members who had survived the Syria ambush, visited her during the investigation period. "You saved those people because that's who you are," Rodriguez had told her. "You can't change your nature, but you can choose how to use it. The Corps taught us to protect those who can't protect themselves. That doesn't have to happen only in uniform." Sarah made her decision based on that conversation and her own evolving understanding of her purpose. She didn't want to return to direct combat operations, but she couldn't abandon the skills that made her effective. She needed a role that would let her protect people while building something constructive. "I want to create a new program," Sarah told Hayes. "Something that combines all these offers into a single mission. Train protective specialists, develop security protocols, and be available for crisis response when technical and tactical skills are both needed." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly a standard career path in our organization," Sarah smiled. "Nothing about my career has been standard. But the attack on the base showed that threats are evolving. Traditional security approaches aren't enough when enemies use sophisticated tactics. We need people who can think like both technicians and warriors." The proposal Sarah outlined was ambitious. She wanted to establish a new training center that would produce hybrid specialists capable of handling both technical and security challenges. Her students would be engineers who could fight, medics who could operate in combat zones, and communicators who could survive in hostile environments. Hayes listened with growing interest as Sarah detailed her vision. The concept addressed several identified gaps in American capabilities. Too many overseas facilities were vulnerable because their personnel were either highly skilled civilians with no security training or security professionals with limited technical knowledge. The meeting lasted 3 hours as Sarah outlined her comprehensive program. She wanted to recruit people like her former self, technical specialists who could be trained in advanced combat skills, and military personnel who could master complex technical systems. The goal was creating a new type of operator who could blend seamlessly into civilian roles while maintaining lethal effectiveness. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the training facility she had designed from the ground up. The Remote Operations Training Center was located in a classified location in Nevada, where her students learned to be invisible guardians in plain sight. They mastered electronics, communications, medical procedures, and engineering principles alongside advanced combat techniques. Her first graduating class included 12 specialists who would deploy to American facilities worldwide. They would work as technicians, medical staff, and support personnel while secretly providing security expertise that could respond to any threat. Each graduate was a living reminder that heroes often hide in plain sight. Captain Torres visited the facility regularly, bringing promising candidates from his unit. The partnership between Sarah's program and conventional special operations had proven incredibly effective. Her graduates served as force multipliers, providing intelligence and support capabilities that enhanced traditional military operations. Dr. Chen had also joined the program as the chief psychological evaluator. His job was ensuring that Sarah's students could handle the mental challenges of living double lives. The work was demanding, requiring people who could maintain their cover identities while staying ready for instant violence. Sarah's own role had evolved into something she had never expected. She was a teacher, strategist, and leader rolled into one. The woman who had spent 3 years trying to escape her warrior nature now embraced it completely while helping others find their own balance between technical expertise and protective capability. The program's first major test came when one of Sarah's graduates, operating undercover as a communications technician at an embassy in Eastern Europe, successfully thwarted an assassination attempt against the American ambassador. The graduate's technical knowledge had allowed him to detect the electronic surveillance being used to track the ambassador's movements, while his combat training enabled him to eliminate the threat. Sarah received regular reports about her graduates' successes around the world. They had prevented terrorist attacks, rescued hostages, and protected American interests in dozens of countries. Most importantly, they had done so while maintaining their cover identities, proving that Sarah's concept of invisible guardians was not only viable but essential. Standing in her office overlooking the training facility, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet technician who had hidden from her past was gone, replaced by someone who had found purpose in training others to protect the innocent. She had learned that running from her nature was impossible, but embracing it responsibly could change the world. Her desk held letters from people she would never meet, families of diplomats, aid workers, and business executives who were alive because her graduates had been watching over them. These testimonials reminded Sarah why her work mattered and why the attack on Forward, Operating Base Titan, had been a beginning rather than an ending. The legend of the technician who eliminated 50 hostiles in a single night had spread throughout the special operations community. But Sarah knew the real story was about transformation, how someone could evolve from a broken veteran into a protector of others, and how skills developed for destruction could be redirected toward preservation. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Sarah watched her newest class of students practicing their dual identities. Tomorrow they would deploy to positions around the world, carrying forward the mission she had discovered in the darkness of that terrible night. They were ready to be invisible guardians, technical experts who could become deadly phantoms when protection was needed. The quiet technician had become something greater than a warrior. She had become a creator of warriors who would never be seen until the moment they were desperately needed. In finding her true purpose, Sarah had ensured that others would never have to choose between their technical talents and their protective instincts. They could be both, just as she had learned to be both, and the world was safer because of it.